Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming to our last talk for today. Tony has over 25 years of experience in InfoSec and systems administration. He's worked in roles ranging from systems design to incident response, tactical intelligence, and managing pen tests. Today, his talk is Incident Response for the Overwhelmed, Understaffed, and Underprepared about the human factors in incident response. Oh my gosh, it's getting to the end of the day. Anyways, thanks a lot for being here, Tony, and why don't you go ahead?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And yes, last talk of the day. So my name is Tony Drake, and this is Incident Response for the Overwhelmed, Understaffed, and Unprepared. Quick outline of what we're going to do today. We're going to start with an introduction. I'm going to introduce the concept of guerrilla incident response, talk about the steps of guerrilla incident response, tools you can use. We'll pause for Q&A, and then depending on how that goes, we have story time. So who am I? I have nearly 25 years of what I used to call playing with malware. I shudder when I look at that and see that because it has been a long road and I have seen a lot of changes over the years. Have about 18 years doing system administration and security roles, ranging the full gambit, as you can imagine. I hold certifications on the CISSP, SANS, web app pen testing, network pen testing, forensics, threat intelligence, and open source intel. Lots of battle scars and lots of hard-won knowledge I hope to share with you today. So a quick disclaimer. I'm going to talk about things. I'm going to tell stories. I don't want you to assume that anything I say or anything in these slides refers to any particular employer, past, present, future, real, imaginary. You'll get the idea. Also, I am a first-person storyteller. I grew up in the South. There is great debate about whether Florida actually is in the South. I say it is, and I will tell stories in the first person. I, me, we, our. Again, that does not mean that I necessarily did it or it happened to a particular employer. I am telling this story to show and demonstrate a technique or an idea. So, story starts with a phone call in the afternoon. Well, actually, it was a link message. It was a chat message when the director of operations said, hey, can you look for something in the SIM? I happened to run the SIM, so this was an easy, of course I can. What would you like me to find? And the next statement was the only statement I needed really to hear. It said, look for suspicious stuff. Now, any of you who've gotten a phone call or a chat message like this knows that that warrants a deeper discussion. That deeper discussion, I made a phone call and I said, what exactly is going on? In the contents of that conversation, which I will not share, essentially had me picking up my stuff at work, grabbing my bags and going 500 miles to a remote location to meet the director of operations and the forensics team to start doing forensics. And as I drove down, I thought about the fact that what I was about to do was unlike anything that I had ever done. I was going to do guerrilla incident response. And I'm not talking about the first kind of guerrilla, and I'm not talking about the second. I'm talking about the third. I'll give bonus points to anybody who puts in Discord without Googling or image searching who the second guerrilla is. So the thing is that incident response has rules. We have rules, we have policies, we have procedures, we have things that we have to do that the corporate says we do. We develop playbooks and orchestration. But there's another set of rules that most people forget about, and that is the rules to guide you as a responder rather than to guide an incident response. These rules allow you to be effective and efficient in dealing with an incident. And this talk is going to be about the second type of rule. If you cannot cope with the stresses, strains, challenges, and emotions that you run into in an incident response, you cannot respond. You have to cope in order to respond. So rule number one is don't panic. Adrenaline rushes are real and keeping calm is important. I can tell you that there is a real physical reaction, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a SOC incident or an ops incident. When you get the phone call, when you see the alert, when you look at the screen and you know that something big is about to happen. You get the chills down your spine, the shivers in your arms, and the pit in your stomach. You need to get past that in order to respond. Keeping calm is important. Rule number 2, write it down. I'm going to introduce a concept that's going to be new to many of you, especially those of you who are younger. It's called a pen and a paper, and they come in these little things we call notebooks. And this is what I mean when I mean write it down. The biggest asset to an investigation is your notes. Your notes will be real time, and later they will help you with the report and they will help you with the response. I like to buy a separate notebook for every single incident. Some people use the same one. Some companies have specific ones. It just kind of goes with whatever works. But here's what happens. You'll be working on something, and you will, pardon me, you will find an idea. You'll be working on thing A and say, oh, I've got to do thing B. Well, you have to write that down, because if you stop working on thing A and move to thing B, you will never finish thing A. If you write it down, you can rest easy that you will get to it later. And when you finish with thing A, you will now know what you're going to do next. You're going to do thing B. You can use the voice recorder on your phone if you happen to be out for a run, out for a drive, at the grocery store, doing some work around the house, and all of a sudden you get a brilliant idea, record it. I'm not talking about Siri or Google Voice dictation. Your level of paranoia may vary, but that information does go to the cloud to be translated into text. So I just record my own voice on what used to be called a tape recorder. Now it's a digital voice recorder, or on a cell phone. And then when the time comes, I go back and I write my dictation into the notebook. Rule number 3, now is not the time for coulda, woulda, shoulda. This quote is from Ernest Hemingway, and he said it best. He said, now is no time to think of what you do not have. Think of what you can do with that there is. What this means in our terms is that during a response, you are going to think of every single project that isn't done, everything you wanted to do, and they said no, every budget item that was rejected. That's for the post-mortem. Right now, you've got to get to work. Rule number 4, you have to be flexible. Now, we all have playbooks, plans, procedures, workbooks, orchestration, whatever you want to call it. And it has been built for every possible situation except for the one that you are dealing with right at this very moment in time. In military terms, no plan ever survived contact with the enemy. So you need to always maintain compliance with all of those things that you have to maintain compliance with, but just know you're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to go off book. You're going to have to get manager approval to do things that they wouldn't necessarily tell you to do if you weren't doing this investigation. Rule number 5, this is probably the hardest one. You're going to screw up. And
do we want to push direct?
And that's perfectly fine. Making mistakes is part of incident response. It is what happens during a response. You're going to do something and say, man, I coulda, woulda, shoulda done something better. The most important thing is to let yourself off the hook at the beginning of the incident before you start, and keep moving. Don't second guess. Rule number 6, just the facts, and that's probabilities. Nobody will ever be as interested in who you are or what you do as when you start working on an incident response. You are going to be asked for information, updates, status, and all of that fun stuff by people who you may not have even known exist, and who you probably didn't even think knew you existed. The problem is, during an incident response, the situation on the ground is fluid and rapidly changing, as they would say in the military. So I use the language of estimative probability to express what I know and how sure I am that I know it. You've probably seen these in reports: high confidence, medium confidence, low confidence, things like that. So we know with high confidence that at 12 midnight on Sunday, Mary's machine began communicating with a country with which we do not do business and with which we do not have any customer relations. We know with high confidence that Mary is not in the building because Mary is on a cruise ship and the badges logs say she's not in the office, and we have pictures of her on the boat. We think with medium confidence that Mary might have gotten infected in the recent travel-related web compromise that we read about here. Why is that medium confidence? Because on Monday, when you go through the email logs and you find the Delta plane ticket themed attachment that she actually clicked on that you found on the laptop, you will now change that item to say, we now know with high confidence this is how she got infected. Rule number 7, always know your end goal. As satisfying as it would be for our investigations to end with a perp walk, with someone in handcuffs, that's not the world we live in and the sandbox we play in. If you are doing one of those kinds of investigations, insider threat, HR, and legal, etc., there's a whole bunch of stuff that's beyond the scope of this talk that you need to manage and monitor. If you are not doing one of those investigations, you have now changed. You are not Matlock or Perry Mason. You are a cross between a commando and a janitor. Your job is to get in, get the bad guys out, clean up the mess, and make sure they don't come back. Rule number 8, voyeurism is bad. When you do forensics, you will have access to all of the data on systems. Sometimes these systems belong to very high-level people and have a lot of things on them. There are 4 types of data that you will find in an investigation. There is data you need to know. This is the malware samples and the emails and the files that are related to the compromise. There are things you do not need to know. Basically, there's everything else. There are things you do not want to know. These are things like browser histories of people who may not always surf only to the corporate website. And there's information that is salacious and interesting. And you are going to treat all of this other information like it is radioactive medical waste in a landfill. You're going to avoid it like the plague. If it does not get you to containment and eradication, move on, forget about it. Rule number 9, eat, walk, sleep, and avoid burnout. We are dedicated to our jobs, but we are also human. And humans have physical needs that they need to manage. You need to eat, you need to sleep, you need to exercise. If you have a routine where you exercise every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you need to keep doing that. If you don't have such a routine, I suggest you start. You have to get up from your screen and walk away. This means eating lunch somewhere other than in front of the computer. This means walking down the hall or walking outside in a circle in the park or something. You have to get away. You will find you are much more effective. When we look at evidence from breached companies, we see that long and detailed incident responses, especially the high visibility ones, burn out the SOC. In the words of Smokey the Bear, to paraphrase, only you can prevent you from burning out. If you make sure that you take care of yourself, you're going to be sharper, you're going to be more effective, more efficient, and you're going to get a better result. So now that we've talked about incident response and how we're going to be good incident responders and how we're going to take care of ourselves, what exactly do we do? So the first thing we have to do is we have to start with an incident. If you don't have an incident, you aren't doing incident response. I know this sounds like a no-brainer and a thank you, Captain Obvious, but all alerts are not incidents and all investigations do not turn into these types of incidents. Once you know that you're dealing with an incident of this type, you've got to evaluate your options. You now know that something's going on and something could be big. You have to make decisions about whether you're going to work it yourself or you're going to call in external help. You have to understand what kind of incident are you dealing with and how big it might be and how sure you are of how big it is. Once you've evaluated those options, you've decided you're going to work it yourself. Now you need to look at what you have and how you can work this incident with what you have. Have you ever done a response like this before? What data is available and what data is missing? I can tell you from experience that no matter how much equipment and fancy instrumentation you have, the incidents never happen on those well-instrumented endpoints. So If you have data missing, which I've never been in an investigation where I said, man, if only there was less data to go through, can you deploy something to help? I talk about this a little bit later, but if you are going to deploy something to help, how long is it going to take? Who's going to do it? And what approvals do you need? If you're stuck, phone a friend. This is really an important one. And conferences like this, usually in person, we meet up with people, we exchange business cards or email or LinkedIn. But when you're in an investigation, you're not going to know everything. And there's a lot of situations where if you call somebody or talk to somebody who's done it before, they can usually get you over the hump. If you're in an industry that has an ISAC or an ISAL or an industry organization that you're a member of, maybe you can contact people through them. If you're a member of a local chapter, ISSA, IC Squared, college cybersecurity programs, maybe you know somebody there who may be able to give you some advice. Trusted friends or colleagues from conferences and certain types of organizations can enlist help from the U.S. government, the CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and the U.S. CERT. Always assume you are being watched. Depending on who the attacker is and the situation, they could be in your emails. They could be in your voicemails. They could be in your chats. This is especially true if you have a cloud breach and you're dealing with a breach of a cloud system. If this is not the adversary in your stuff, you also have to remember that nowadays everything is legally discoverable. If you work in a large company, your emails and chat logs and all that are being archived and saved, and people send requests for discovery. And so there are certain words that you may use that may not mean what you think they mean. It may be discovered, and then you will end up later on trying to explain what you said, how you said it, what you did. It is much better not to type it than to have to explain and defend it later. If you are getting outside help or using your outside counsel, you have to discuss it with your legal department and or your external legal department to decide exactly how communications are going to take place. Preserve your evidence, all of it. So long ago and far away, when forensics started as a discipline, we had rules of thumb, and it was find the bad thing and unplug it, take it offline. Well, that's great, but you lose a lot of data when you do that. An unsaved artifact is an artifact that you are sure to need or want later. So there are a couple things that go into preservation. The first is you never work on the original. You have to make copies of everything. You have a golden copy on an external hard drive or something like that, share drive, that you don't touch, and then you work on a copy of the original. If you screw up the copy you're working on, you make a new copy. If you are dealing with a user endpoint, give the user a loaner and keep their machine. It may help you later to be able to go back and get something directly. And while I'm talking about preserving evidence, I want to talk a little bit about memory, because memory is one of the most useful artifacts, and it's also one of the least understood. In order to capture memory on any Windows system is trivial. Instead of shutting the system down, what you do is you hibernate the system. If it's not a laptop where the hibernate option doesn't appear in the options menu, there is an administrator level command that you can execute, which will allow you to hibernate the system. This will write a file called hiberfile.sys, which can be analyzed as a full memory dump of the system. If this is a more advanced group, you may be able to look and see if there's an existing hiberfile.sys, and you can copy that to hiberfile.sys.old, and now you have 2 copies of memory. If you are dealing with a Linux system, memory capture is and analysis is a lot more complicated. I'm not going to go in the details here, but you can Google AVML, and there are some great blogs that explain the intricacies. Even if you can't get all of the things that you need to process Linux memory, save a copy of the raw memory. You can analyze it with strings. You can carve binaries out of it and do a lot of things even without being able to use tools like volatility. So now that I've talked a little bit about how to do a response, let's talk about tools. This is incident response for the unprepared, which means that you probably don't have a fancy toolkit waiting for your use. So here are things that you can get and grab and use immediately. First thing you're going to do is gather artifacts. In order to analyze data, you got to capture it. And one of my favorite old school low-tech tools is called TR3 Secure. You see it's from 2013. It uses a couple of tools, raw copy and robocopy, to copy Windows artifacts and put them into a zip file on the infected machine so that you can then take those files and analyze them on something else. Redline. Redline used to be a Mandiant tool, then it became a FireEye tool. As FireEye and Mandiant have now split, I'm not sure whose tool it's going to be going forward. But Redline is kind of an all-in-one memory and system timeline and triage tool. If you don't have any other tools and you don't have a lot of expertise, using Redline can basically tell you where to start. It will grab a full copy of memory, which can be analyzed with other tools, as well as doing timelining and registry analysis, and sometimes it will even tell you which binaries are suspicious. Kanza and Power Forensics. These are two PowerShell tools. If you are a PowerShell person, you probably think you can do just about anything in PowerShell. Well, Power Forensics and Kanza allow you to prove it. You can download these frameworks, you can look at the scripts, you can improve them, change them, you can do whatever you like with them and pull artifacts and do an incident response. OS Query. If you are dealing with non-Windows machines, OS Query from Facebook and their security people is a great tool. It essentially gives you kind of an EDR capability, but it's open source. It is very good for Macintosh and Linux systems, for which a lot of the tools that I talk about previously do not work. Security Onion. If you're going to be looking at any kind of network data, Security Onion is your tool. You can deploy a Security Onion sensor on a network with just a basically any old PC or any old server with two NICs, one to listen in promiscuous mode and one to connect to the box. It has everything you need to do packet capture, logging, IDS, you name it, it's in there. So now we've gathered the artifacts, we have to analyze them. And again, since this is incident response for the unprepared, how exactly are we going to do that? Well, my first tool is the SIFT VM. SIFT is put out by SANS, and they spend a lot of time and effort to make a fully functional virtual machine that you can download, log into, and start analyzing artifacts. Currently, it is on Ubuntu 20.04. There's an ISO. It's downloadable as a VM. If you want to build your own Ubuntu VM, you can basically install SIFT onto that VM. All of the tools that are on it have been tested and set up to do incident response tasks and analyze artifacts you have collected with tools in the previous slides. Sometimes it doesn't have exactly everything you want, but it's very easy to install or update tools from GitHub if you want something. If you are going to install another tool on an existing SIFT box, you should use a virtual environment. So if you're using Python, they're VMs. If you're using Ruby, I believe they're the same. But you do not want to install new tools, new libraries, new language libraries, etc., onto a SIFT box because you don't want to upset the delicate balance that SANS has spent so much time trying to preserve. Easy tools. So along with SIFT, SANS paid a instructor, Eric Zimmerman, to create a set of tools to essentially take care of processing every single Windows artifact that you could need in an investigation. These are PowerShell tools. You can download them, you can look at them, you can change them, but they're very effective if you're doing analysis on a Windows system. Bro. So Bro is part of Security Onion. I like to think of Bro as a packet decomposition and logging tool. That's how I describe Bro. What it will do is take a PCAP file. So you have managed to get packet capture. Maybe your organization has it. Maybe you've gotten it some other way. Maybe you've gone on a box and done TCP dump or Wireshark. You now have a PCAP and it's huge and you want to get information out of it. You can run Bro using the replay option. Sometimes it takes a while to figure that one out. But on that PCAP, and what it will do is it will take that PCAP and it will split it into logs for each level of the OSI. So, for example, if you want to look at HTTP requests, there's an HTTP.log. If you want to look at DNS, there's a DNS.log. There's a connection log, which has essentially net flow. This allows you to very quickly identify traffic you're interested in. If there are files involved, if, for example, you think that there was a malicious file downloaded and you happen to have a PCAP of it, that is pure gold. And you can use Bro to carve that file out, and you now have the original file which was sent down from the network. Soft Elk. If you do not have a SIM and you do not have a way to process logs, the Windows log viewers are definitely subpar for that task. So the easiest way to do this is using a VM called Soft Elk. It was developed by Phil Hagen, another SANS instructor, for his SIM class. This basically is a SIM on the fly on a VM. You run the VM and you can immediately import logs. You can syslog to it, all of that fun stuff. It is free and downloadable from the internet. So now we move into the futuristic phase of the talk where I say, what if you're not doing an incident right now? What if you actually say, you know what? This really sounds like a lot of work. I want to do stuff ahead of time so that I am not running around trying to do all these things during an incident. Well, first thing I tell you is use Sysmon on every Windows system. If you are not running Sysmon, my only question for you is why? And after you give me an explanation, I'm going to say, yeah, but why? And then after that explanation, it's also going to be, yeah, but why? Sysmon is a no-brainer. It is a tool for Microsoft Sys internals. It generates what Windows logging should have been, but never has been. It has a config file, and if you don't want to mess around with creating your own config file and figuring out the things you want and don't want, that's okay. All you have to do is go to Swift on Security's GitHub page, download the Sysmon config. Swift on Security has generated a file that will work for almost all circumstances and give you the data that you need in a log to be able to find evil on the system. If you are dealing with Microsoft Security event logs on your systems, it pays to be very diligent. There are a lot of things that the Microsoft event logs, especially the security event log, can log. There are a lot of those things that it does not log by default. There are registry keys that need to be set, GPOs that need to be enabled, scheduled tasks, things like that. There are sometimes patches that need to be applied. So if you need to go through and look at what you are logging in your security event log, and if you want to log things other than what is in there, you need to look at how to do it and make sure you test and implement. The Mcache. So starting in Windows 8, they added a new registry hive to Windows called the Mcache. They backported it to Windows 7. It requires a patch and a scheduled task in order to work. But why do you care about it? The Mcache is forensics gold. It keeps track of file execution on a Windows system, complete with the hash of the file, the date, the time, the command line, information like that. It can be a gold mine of information when you are trying to sort out an incident and don't have a lot of other information to go on. Remember that logs can be stomped, but Mcache cannot be. So now I'm going to pause for some Q&A. If we have some Q&A, we can do it now.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please post them in general. We haven't gotten anything yet.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and move on to kind of story time. These are scenarios and situations. I want to remind everybody that my disclaimer from the start of the talk still applies. Again, don't assume this necessarily happened to me. Don't. So here is my contact information. I'll ask one more time for questions.
Thanks, Tony, for your talk today. Nobody's asked any questions yet. Come on, y'all. You're being very silent all of a sudden.
Wow, I guess I explained everything perfectly. Wow.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So it's also the end of the day on Saturday, so I don't blame folks if they're feeling tired. I get what y'all are thinking.
We'll just give a minute to finish.
Well, all right. Thanks again, Tony. I don't know if you'll be sticking around in the chat for a few minutes. If you are, people might have come with some questions and poke you in the chat. But yeah, again, thanks. Thank you so much, Tony. And for everybody who's still watching the stream, we are about to switch over, like almost instantaneously after I'm finished speaking, to Aaron and Dan, who's representing Rule 4 today. And yeah,
Getting ready for the countdown.
thanks a lot, everyone.